Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, only to discover their secret life was unfolding right beside you? In today's story, a husband uncovers his wife's betrayal with her ex, and what follows is not just heartbreak, but a devastating exposure that shakes both families to the core. This is not just about infidelity. It's about betrayal, revenge, and the price of lies. And I promise you, the twist you'll hear today will leave you stunned. Welcome back to Cheating Stories 7. If you love dramatic stories about betrayal and revenge, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. It really helps us grow this community. So now, let's step into the story. She cheated with her ex. I exposed her before both families and took everything back. Evan Hale believed in quiet routines. 2 mugs upside down on the rack, 2 backpacks leaned like loyal dogs by the door, 2 boys who woke to the same soft knock on their bedroom frame. Mornings were choreography. He measured beans, Lena measured time. She moved through the kitchen in a fitted navy blouse and a ponytail that meant business, a dentist by day, and, at least in the way neighbors spoke of her, a storybook mother by night. In the photos, nothing broke the surface. In the photos, it never does. On paper, their decade looked like the kind of stability people barter for. A small house with a maple that flamed each October. A calendar pinned with school concerts and checkups. He taught probability and ethics to undergrads. She straightened teeth and saved smiles. The boys, Jonah with his dinosaur shoelaces, Miles who named his stuffed bear captain, learned that home sounded like the dishwasher's hush and the click of Lena's keys at 7:42 a.m. Evan believed in the math of effort. Add patience, subtract pride, carry the small annoyances, and you will get peace. Evenings were their best version. Homework at the table, a pot simmering, music low enough that you had to lean in to hear lyrics. When patients canceled or students plagiarized, they told each other and made the jokes small. Sometimes they remembered the first years, thin furniture, thick hope, and laughed at how seriously they'd taken coupons. On Friday nights, he rubbed her shoulders while she scrolled through recipes, and he thought not for the first time that ordinary happiness has a temperature, warm enough to soften you, not hot enough to burn. The first slip wasn't lipstick or a stranger's shadow. It was a light. Lena's phone lit up from across the room, and the change on her face was so quick he almost missed it. A private glow, then the practiced casualness of tucking the phone beneath a mailer. He filed it under long day. Clinics were short-staffed. Insurance systems broke whenever they felt like it. Everyone they knew was tired. She was allowed a secret laugh with a screen that had delivered nothing but logistics for years. He told himself a useful lie. It's the economy, the clinic, the news, the age of everyone being slightly somewhere else. The lie was merciful because it let him keep moving. In the morning, she'd place his travel mug by the door without looking, and he'd pretend that love can be measured by muscle memory alone. But patterns whisper even when you won't admit you're listening. The phone learned to live face down. Notifications, which used to sound like domestic life, school emails, appointment reminders, arrived in a new cadence. She started laughing at nothing in particular, the kind of laugh people practice for someone they are trying to impress. And when he offered to take the boys to soccer so she could catch up on charts, she said, "No, I've got them," which should have felt like love and somehow felt like a rehearsal. At night, rain stitched the windows and the boys negotiated over pajama tops. Lena sat on the couch with a throw over her knees, a glass of water lifted to her lips but never quite drunk. The phone lit again, just the briefest glow, and the smile landed somewhere that wasn't him. "Everything okay?" he asked, aiming for light. "Clinic craziness," she said, and the answer was so plausible he hated himself for noticing how easily it came. He wanted to say, "You're far away," but there's no safe way to measure distance when the other person can say, "I'm right here," so he didn't. He kissed her temple and felt her lean in, then away, as if she'd remembered a different choreography half a beat too late. Security is a still lake, he knew. It looks like a mirror until you step where the drop begins. He told himself, again, that this was nothing. That marriage collects harmless secrets the way pockets collect lint. That tomorrow would be a better story because they would write it that way. He closed his eyes on the mercy of that lie and slept, not realizing that mercy, when extended to the wrong thing, becomes an accomplice. One evening, Lena came home later than usual. The garage door creaked open at nearly 10, long past the rhythm their family had always kept. When she walked in, her heels clicked too loudly, her hair unkempt, and something sharper than perfume lingered on her breath. Evan leaned forward from the couch where he had been grading essays. It wasn't wine, not the Cabernet they opened on anniversaries, but the raw tang of vodka disguised under mint. She had told him that morning she had a packed day at the clinic, patients back to back. She had sighed. Yet she stood before him like someone stumbling out of another life. "Long day?" he asked gently. "The longest," she replied, dropping her bag by the stairs. "Root canals, consultations, I could barely breathe." He wanted to believe her. But earlier that day, unsettled by her silence on the phone, he had called the clinic receptionist. "Oh, Dr. Hale, she didn't come in today," the woman had said, confusion thick in her voice. Evan had thanked her and hung up, his chest tightening as if he had been caught holding a secret that wasn't his. Now Lena avoided his eyes, brushing past him with the excuse of needing a shower. He noticed her blouse wrinkled as if worn too long, her heels scuffed from more than a clinic corridor. She smelled not of fluoride and antiseptic, but of smoke from a bar he didn't know. He tucked the doubt away like a blade hidden in a sleeve, dangerous to hold, dangerous to drop. The boys were asleep, their soft breaths upstairs like a lullaby, unaware of the cracks forming below. Evan told himself he was imagining things. Stress made people drink. Doctors skipped shifts for conferences or emergencies. Marriage required grace, didn't it? But grace without truth begins to rot. At midnight, when the house was dark, the phone lit again on her nightstand. He watched the glow reflect across her cheekbones. She turned away, lowering her voice, laughter spilling out in a hushed tone he remembered from their early courtship. That laugh used to be his reward, his evidence that he was enough. Now it sounded like a code exchanged between strangers. He shifted in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing only fragments of her whispers. "Tomorrow, I can't wait, you're impossible." Each word landed like glass underfoot, sharp but too quiet to wake the children. He closed his eyes, tried to steady his breath. A decade of trust doesn't explode with a hammer. It fractures like porcelain. Hairline cracks invisible until one more whisper, one more lie makes it burst in your hands. When she slid the phone face down and curled against him, her skin cool from the shower, Evan froze. He did not put his arm around her. He did not kiss her forehead. He simply stared at the dark, knowing he had just met the first version of Lena he did not recognize. Saturday mornings had always been sacred in their house. Jonah spread his Lego city across the living room. Miles trailed behind Lena asking for scraps of attention, and Evan worked the stove, frying eggs while the smell of butter filled the air. For years, these small rituals were proof that ordinary life was still enough. But lately, even those mornings felt fragile. That day, Lena hovered by the kettle, her phone balanced in one hand, her half-smile pinned to a string of messages instead of her children. "Mommy, hot." Miles squealed as she lifted the pot too far over his head. Evan moved faster than thought. He lunged, seized the mug, and felt the sting of steam scorch his forearm as liquid sloshed out. A hiss left his throat before he caught it. Miles blinked at him, wide-eyed, hair damp with the brush of near danger. Lena finally looked up, startled out of her screen. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she gasped, but her voice was flat, too polished. The words slid out like lines she had rehearsed for mistakes in other rooms with other people. Evan set the cup down hard enough to rattle the counter. He pressed his sleeve against the burn, the ache sharp but survivable. What wasn't survivable was the hollowness in her apology, the way her eyes darted back to the glowing phone before Miles had even stepped away. "You okay, buddy?" Evan crouched to check his son's shoulders and hair. Miles nodded quickly, already distracted by the promise of pancakes. Children forget faster than adults, but Evan didn't forget. He felt the silence pressing on him heavier than the burn itself. Then Lena said, too quickly as if plugging a hole in a sinking ship, "I ran into an old friend this week. We just caught up, that's all." Friend. Evan heard the capital letter in her tone, the hesitation that wrapped the word in italics. Not a colleague, not a patient's parent, someone she wanted to protect, someone who belonged in her secret world, not their shared one. She smiled like it was harmless, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. Evan wiped the counter slowly, deliberately, as if the action could buy him time. His instincts screamed to press her. Who? When? Where? But his patience whispered that answers volunteered are more revealing than answers demanded. So he only nodded and filed the detail away in the quiet ledger he was already building. That day marked a turning point. He began noticing time differently, not in lectures, not in appointments, but in betrayals too small for anyone else to see. Late replies to texts when she never used to make him wait. Weekend emergencies at the clinic that stretched into hours with no evidence of patients seen. A sudden obsession with her lock screen, the phone now living face down like a guilty conscience. Each moment alone could have been excused. Together, they formed a constellation he could no longer unsee. That night, as Lena's phone lit up again, Evan traced the burn on his forearm. The pain had become more than physical. It was a warning, a visible mark for an invisible fracture. Upstairs, Jonah built towers, Miles asked for stories, and the house pretended to be normal. Downstairs, Evan realized something harsher than anger. Love was not failing quietly. It was already converting itself into evidence. The house was asleep, wrapped in the kind of silence you could mistake for safety. Jonah's soft snoring drifted from behind his door. Miles clutched Captain Bear under one arm, and even the refrigerator hummed in a lower register as if it too respected the quiet. But Evan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail from the past week. The burn on his arm, the word friend spoken with that unnatural emphasis, the hollow apologies. Sleep would not come. Doubt kept circling, tightening like a rope around his chest. At 3:17 a.m., he rose for water, padding barefoot down the hallway. That was when he heard it, a voice not meant for him, seeping through the crack of their half-closed bedroom door. "He's safe, boring, I need excitement." The words weren't shouted, they were worse, careless, tossed into the air like truths repeated so often they had lost their sting. Each syllable struck like cold rain, and in them Evan heard the obituary of his marriage. He froze in the hallway, the empty glass hanging useless in his hand. Her laugh followed, light, rehearsed, intimate. The kind of laugh he had once thought she reserved only for him. It wasn't just the content, it was the ease, the tone of a woman describing a bland meal, a shirt too plain, a life too predictable. 10 years of shared history dismissed in a whisper to someone unseen. Humiliation hit harder than rage. He was not even worthy of her discretion anymore. He leaned against the wall, every instinct screaming to burst through the door, to demand the phone, the name, the whole truth. But he knew better. Truth dragged out by anger becomes theater, and he wanted more than theater. He wanted proof, cold, undeniable, irrefutable. Then came the final blow. Her voice softened, intimate. "Tomorrow night, same place." A low laugh followed, then the creak of the mattress as she shifted, unconcerned, as if her double life carried no weight. By the time Evan stepped back into the room, Lena was already sliding under the blanket, her phone tucked away. She curled against him, draping an arm across his chest with the practiced comfort of a woman who believed she could still play both parts. Her skin pressed close, but her intent was somewhere else entirely. He could feel it in the cadence of her breathing, the distance inside her touch. Evan lay rigid, eyes wide in the dark, cataloging the words he could never unhear. He thought of their first kiss at the university mixer, when she had tilted her head as if she had chosen him with certainty. He thought of the boy's drawings taped to the fridge, of the maple tree outside that had shed its leaves the day they signed the mortgage. And then he thought of the 3 words now echoing inside him: safe, boring, excitement. The arithmetic of betrayal, reducing a decade of loyalty into 3 dismissive categories. He did not sleep. He did not even close his eyes. By dawn, he wasn't rehearsing an argument. He was rehearsing a plan, truth first, exposure later. Revenge, quiet, patient, undeniable, would come last. The first phone call to the clinic felt almost accidental. Evan had been genuinely worried. Lena had left early that morning, scrubs folded neatly in her tote, a thermos in hand. By noon, when silence still stretched between them, he dialed the receptionist and asked if she might pass along a message. The pause on the other end was long enough to fracture something inside him. "She hasn't been in since Monday," the woman said, confusion threaded into her voice. Evan murmured a polite thank you, but his chest tightened like he had swallowed glass. 3 consecutive no-shows, patients waiting, leaving angry, an office chair sitting empty while Lena lived somewhere else. This wasn't neglect, it was choice. Later that week, Jonah came home waving a note about the school's spring festival. Lena had told him she'd been at a special conference with the teachers. But when Evan asked the principal, Mrs. Riley smiled kindly. "We'd love to see Lena more often, but no, there hasn't been a conference this month." The lie was so unnecessary, so casual, it chilled him more than the truth could have. And then Mrs. Patel, their longtime nanny, offered the final piece. Folding laundry on the couch, her hands slowed as if reluctant to speak. "I didn't want to meddle, sir, but I saw her leave twice last week. A man was waiting in a silver coupe. She seemed very familiar with him." Her eyes softened, apology woven into every syllable. "I thought you should know." Evan's breath caught, his pulse pounding at his temples. He wanted to shout, to slam a fist into the wall, to drag Lena into the room and demand every answer she had hidden. But anger would make him reckless. Recklessness would give her an escape. So he pressed the fury down, layered it beneath the discipline of a man who had spent years teaching his students that evidence is stronger than instinct. That night, after the boys were asleep, he sat at his desk with a yellow legal pad. He wrote dates, times, excuses, clinic no-shows, phantom conferences, silver coupe sightings. He circled each entry in red, the lines connecting like constellations in a sky only he could read. Each mark was betrayal, but together they formed a map of intent. The next morning, he drafted an email to his department chair, a request for short leave citing family matters. He asked his colleague Noah to cover lectures, framing it as an emergency. In truth, it was an emergency, not the kind where paramedics rush in, but the kind that corrodes a home from the inside. He wasn't abandoning his post as husband or father. He was repositioning. Love had been given freely on trust, but if the marriage was collapsing, it would not collapse under rumor or doubt. It would collapse under the weight of proof no one could dispute. That night, he kissed Jonah and Miles on their foreheads, tucking them in with unusual care. Lena brushed past him in the hallway, muttering about needing to catch up on charts. He let her go without a word. Back at his desk, he opened a fresh notebook and wrote a single line across the top of the page. Operation Proof. Evan had always trusted the quiet. The steady hum of the dishwasher, the clatter of plates, the predictable rhythm of his lectures. These were anchors in a world that rarely betrayed him. But now the quiet carried a pulse. Lena's phone, face down on the nightstand, trembled against the wood like a trapped secret knocking to be set free. He waited until her breathing slipped into the deep rhythm of sleep. Her arm draped over him, heavy with a false peace. Slowly, carefully, he slid out from beneath it and moved toward her desk. Lena had always been careless with numbers, scribbling passwords between grocery lists and appointment notes. Tonight, her carelessness was his key. The screen blinked awake. He tried their wedding date. Wrong, Jonah's birthday. Wrong, Miles's birthday. On the third attempt, the phone unlocked, and with it her double life spilled open into his hands. Messages first. His chest constricted as he read. "I miss you, Rye. Can't stop thinking about last night." Strings of hearts, fire emojis, midnight promises blurred between fantasy and evidence. Hotel reservations. Excuses dressed up as late patients and emergency calls dissolved into confirmation numbers and addresses. Then the photos, his breath caught. Selfies in mirrors he didn't recognize. Close-ups meant for another man's eyes. Images that left no room for interpretation. And there, reflected in a glass door, the angular jaw and reckless grin he knew too well. Ryan Cole. The name hit him like a strike to the ribs. A decade ago, Ryan had been his freshman advisee, a cocky kid with more ambition than discipline, leaning on charm to scrape by. Evan had tutored him, written him a recommendation letter, even covered for him once when he nearly failed statistics. Ryan had drifted into modeling, his face turning up in glossy ads now and then. A man who had built a career on appearance, not substance. And now in Lena's phone, Ryan wasn't just a memory. He was an accomplice in dismantling everything Evan had built. The humiliation didn't come from the sexts or the hotel rooms. It didn't even come from the explicit photos. The wound was sharper. Lena had chosen the past, the reckless boy Evan once tried to guide, over the man who had given her stability, children, and a home. Evan sat on the edge of the bed, the glow of the phone turning his face ghostly pale. His hands shook, not from anger but from the crushing weight of recognition. All the lectures he had given about probability, about how evidence rewrites belief, now turned inward. Tonight, evidence had rewritten his life faster than his mind could follow. Lena stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible, shifting closer as if she sensed the void yawning open between them. Evan locked the phone, slid it back onto the nightstand, and stepped into the hallway. There, under the dim glow of the nightlight, he pressed his palms against his eyes and swallowed the sob rising in his throat. This was no longer suspicion. It was proof, and proof was power. Suspicion alone had been corrosive. But now Evan had proof, screenshots, photos, hotel confirmations, and proof demanded more than anger. It demanded precision. He took his short leave from the university, not to rest, but to watch, to study, to become the quiet historian of his own undoing. He bought a second phone under a new number, installed a dash cam in his car that never powered down, and began narrating observations into a voice memo app as if logging an academic study. Subject left house at 8:13 a.m., returned at 10:42 p.m., claimed emergency dental procedure. Reality, boutique gym on Market Street. Duration, 2 hours, departed with mail, identified as Ryan Cole. From the driver's seat, parked just beyond the gym's glass front, Evan filmed through the windshield. Lena emerged in leggings and a windbreaker, cheeks flushed but not from a treadmill. Ryan was waiting with a smoothie, grinning like years had never passed. She kissed him openly, a quick peck that deepened, practiced into familiarity. Evan's stomach clenched, but his hands remained steady as the camera captured it all. The second observation came at a cafe near the park. A lunch that blurred into coffee, into dessert, into twilight. Evan sat far enough away to be just another patron scrolling on his phone, but his ears caught their laughter, hers too high, his too eager. They didn't sound like old friends catching up. They sounded like people rehearsing futures. When Ryan touched her hand across the table, she didn't withdraw. She leaned closer. The third was the cruelest. Behind her clinic in the dim shadow of the parking lot, Lena pressed herself against Ryan. Her wedding ring still glinted on her finger, but she kissed him like it was a stage prop, not a vow. Evan watched from his car, the dashcam recording, his jaw aching from how hard he clenched it. Still, he did not confront. He collected, he archived, he prepared. And then late one night, scrolling through Ryan's social media for patterns, Evan found something that froze him more than any kiss. A sparkling diamond in a carousel of photos, captioned, she said yes, forever starts now. Ryan was engaged to Marissa Kent, a fashion PR manager whose firm had recently pitched a rebrand proposal to none other than Lena's father's dental chain. The pieces slid into place with a sickening clarity. Lena hadn't simply fallen back in love with her ex. This wasn't nostalgia pulling her under. She was playing leverage, trying to entwine her old flame with her father's empire, positioning herself not as a cheater but as a power broker. She thought she was playing chess while Evan sat quietly as a pawn. But pawns, when they reach the other side of the board, can become something else. Evan pressed the record button one last time that night, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. She thinks she's holding the cards, but the truth is already mine. The call came like a blade in the night, Mrs. Patel's voice sharp with panic. Miles fell off the ladder in the backyard. Jonah screamed for his mother, but she didn't come. Evan's skin went cold. He drove as if every light was green, Elijah gripping the dashboard beside him, both men silent in dread. At the ER, antiseptic air wrapped around them like ice. Nurses wheeled Miles past, his tiny wrist twisted at an angle no child should be. Evan bent low, whispering comfort, kissing his son's damp forehead while his own chest threatened to collapse. The doctor returned after what felt like a century. Hairline fracture. Painful, but it will heal with a cast. He'll be fine in a few weeks. Relief should have softened Evan's shoulders. Instead, it sharpened the fury burning in his veins. Because Lena was in the corner, phone still in hand. Even as the doctor explained, the screen lit again, buzz after buzz, Ryan's name glowing like an infection. She angled it away, but Evan saw. He always saw now. When the nurse left, Evan turned to her, his voice low but honed like a blade. You didn't hear him, your son, screaming for you because you were too busy laughing into your phone. Her eyes filled instantly, tears sliding into place like an actress hitting her mark. She clutched at his sleeve, whispering hoarsely, "Don't do this here, not in front of them. You're making me out to be a monster." He leaned closer, words slicing quieter than a shout but louder than any scream. At least I never betrayed my family and called it spice. Color drained from her face. Jonah looked up from his chair, confusion shadowing his eyes, sensing the tension even if not the words. Around them, strangers began to stare, the kind of stare that didn't need context to smell rot. Lena tried to flip the script, her voice pitched just high enough for witnesses. You don't understand. You're absent, always working, always buried in your students. I carry this family alone. Evan's jaw locked, but his tone never wavered. Absent, maybe, but not in the way that matters. I was never absent in loyalty. I was never absent in fidelity. He let the silence expand, forcing her to drown in it. I never left our sons screaming while I laughed with someone else. And I never, ever looked them in the eye after breaking them and dared to call it love. Her hands trembled, the phone still shaking between her fingers. Another buzz, another message from Ryan vibrating through the sterile quiet of the ER. The sound seemed to echo against every lie she had built, rattling the room like a truth too loud to hide. Lena's tears spilled for real this time, raw, unweaponized, the tears of a woman realizing the ground beneath her had already cracked wide open. But Evan didn't soften, not anymore. He sat back beside Miles's bed, resting one hand protectively on his son's shoulder, his eyes never leaving Lena. For the first time, the balance had shifted. She wasn't the one keeping secrets. She was the one being watched, and still her phone buzzed. The night after the hospital confrontation, Lena tried something different. Not crocodile tears, not silence. This time, words. She sat on the edge of their bed, makeup scrubbed away, eyes swollen, fingers twisting the hem of her blouse like a child rehearsing shame. I never wanted this to happen, she began softly. You were safe, solid. My father thought that's what I needed. He wouldn't give me the flagship clinic unless I married someone respectable, someone established. Ryan was just a broke dreamer back then, and you were tenure track. It was practical. Evan stayed still, his silence pulling the confession out of her like a siphon. I thought I could grow into it, and I did for a while. But when Ryan came back, it rewired everything. He made me feel wanted again for who I was, not for what I could build. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. Therapy, counseling, just give me one more chance. Her voice cracked, but Evan heard the calculus beneath the tears. She thought she was revealing the darkest twist. She thought he was hearing the worst for the first time. But months earlier, while helping his father-in-law Wyatt review an alumni grant proposal, Evan had glimpsed something buried in the legalese of the Hale family trust. A clause, if Lena divorced for cause, or was proven at fault for moral misconduct, her entire stake in the Hale dental chain would revert back to the trust. In plain language, if she cheated, she lost everything. At the time, Evan had treated it as a curiosity, a footnote in a document too dense to matter, but now it gleamed like a blade in his hand. So when Lena begged, her tears wetting the sheets between them, he tilted his head and asked quietly, You're asking me for forgiveness, But tell me the truth, are you fighting for me or for what you'll lose if this ends? Her lips parted. The pause was too long, the silence too loud. Finally, she whispered, I can't lose the clinic. It's my future, Evan. It's everything I've worked for. Not you, not us, the clinic. The final clarity cut sharper than rage ever could. She hadn't come crawling back for love. She was bargaining for assets, trying to stitch loyalty back together with fear. Evan leaned against the headboard, folding his hands across his chest, watching her squirm in the dim light. He didn't tell her what he knew. Not yet. The inheritance clause was his checkmate, and she still believed she had pawns left on the board. Inside, he made a silent vow. He wouldn't just leave. He would strip away every illusion she had built, every false card she had been playing since the day she said, I do. When the truth came out, it wouldn't just ruin her marriage. It would erase the very foundation she had married to protect. And the cruelest part? She had handed him the motive on a silver platter, confessing not out of remorse, but out of fear. Evan had always told his students that numbers don't lie, people do. So when Lena's excuses grew thinner and her apologies more polished, he stopped listening to her words and started tracing numbers instead. Bank statements, credit card bills, line items that didn't belong. He spotted it in the neat columns, a line of credit opened 6 months earlier under his name, except he had never signed the application. The signature looked almost right, but he knew the slope of his pen, strokes the way he knew his own heartbeat. This wasn't his, it was hers. The balance funneled into a private account. That account funded a paper trail of hotel suites, designer boutiques, and digital gift cards. Evan followed the trail to a downtown hotel with velvet curtains and a discreet lobby. The manager, an older man with an immaculate tie and a too-quick smile, recognized Lena's photo instantly. Ah, Mrs. Hale, a frequent guest, always checked in with the same young man. Evan leaned in, voice measured. I'll need confirmation. The manager hesitated, then nodded toward the security room. We're happy to cooperate, Professor Hale. Cameras don't lie. Minutes later, Evan had the footage. Lena walking in with Ryan, her hand in his, their bodies pressed close as they disappeared into elevators that never returned to the lobby until morning. He saved everything, timestamps, merchant codes, video stills. Each piece logged and sealed into the growing archive that had begun as operation proof. But the rot went deeper. Her phone buzzed that night, another message from Ryan. If Daddy yanks the chain, we leak his tax stuff. Evan froze. He scrolled further, his pulse hammering. Ryan had hacked Wyatt Hale's email weeks ago. The proof sat in another thread Lena hadn't deleted, screenshots of subject lines from Wyatt's private correspondence. Tax filings, trust allocations, donor write-offs. Sensitive enough to cripple the family's reputation if exposed. This wasn't just adultery anymore. It was conspiracy. Lena hadn't only betrayed her husband. She was conspiring with her lover against her own father, the man who had built the empire she stood to inherit. And Ryan wasn't simply her distraction. He was her co-conspirator, using her access to pry open doors, blackmailing her family with their own secrets. Evan sat back in his chair, the weight of revelation pressing into his chest. The cheating had gutted him. The forgery had enraged him. But this was war. And Lena had chosen a battlefield she didn't understand. Because Evan wasn't just a husband scorned anymore. He was the keeper of two truths. A wife who had betrayed her vows, and a daughter who had turned traitor against her own bloodline. When he played those truths, he wouldn't just end her marriage. He would end her legacy. On the morning of Miles's 8th birthday, the house looked almost like redemption. Streamers curled from the ceiling, balloons clung to corners, and a cake frosted in bright blues and yellows waited on the island. Lena moved with a cheerful precision, her voice pitched just high enough to sound like motherhood restored. She thought sprinkles and candles could plaster over cracks in the foundation. Evan said nothing. He tied Miles's shoelace, ruffled Jonah's hair, and thanked Lena for the decorations as if nothing in the world was broken. His smile was steady, his calm so complete it could almost be mistaken for forgiveness. By late afternoon, both families had gathered, Wyatt and his wife, Lena's siblings, Evan's mother with her soft laugh. Conversations mingled with the sounds of tearing, wrapping paper and clinking glasses. Evan played his part flawlessly, the picture of a husband still invested, still devoted. When the candles were lit, Miles blew them out in one breath and the kitchen erupted in cheers. Laughter swelled, filling the room with the sound of innocence Lena thought she could still claim. She leaned against the counter, smiling, rehearsed but fragile. That was when Evan moved. He reached beneath his chair and withdrew a slim, silver-wrapped box, not for his son, but for Wyatt. "A gift," he said evenly, "for everything you've built, for the family you entrusted me with." Wyatt raised an eyebrow, unwrapped the package with surgeon's precision, and opened the black binder inside. The first page, a glossy still of Lena and Ryan outside the gym, their embrace caught mid-frame. The next, screenshots of messages, "I miss you, Rye, last night was perfect." Then hotel reservations, credit card records, the forged loan application, Evan's falsified signature circled in red. Another turn of the page, Ryan's engagement announcement, diamond flashing under the caption, "She said yes." The room fell silent. The only sound was the paper shifting beneath Wyatt's hand. Lena's lips parted, a denial trembling to life, but Evan wasn't finished. He set another envelope on the table. "Filed 10 days ago, divorce petition. Grounds, adultery and fraud, copies already with the court and council." Wyatt's face hardened into stone. He didn't shout. He didn't rise. He simply closed the binder, pushed it across the table toward his daughter, and said in a voice that cut sharper than any scream, "Sign." Lena's mother covered her face, sobbing. Jonah and Miles fidgeted uneasily, sensing the fracture without understanding its weight. Evan bent, whispered reassurance into their hair, and guided them upstairs. He kissed their foreheads, tucked their blankets, promised safety in a tone that didn't shake. When he returned, the room had changed. Streamers sagged. The half-eaten cake looked absurd beneath the weight of exposed truth. Lena stood trembling, the binder open in front of her, denial already dead in her throat. Ryan's name flashed across her phone again, vibrating against the counter like a curse. But she didn't dare touch it. The ambush was complete. The witnesses were chosen, and the truth had been delivered with surgical precision on her son's birthday in front of both families, where no one could look away. The fallout did not wait politely. It erupted. 2 days after Miles's birthday ambush, Ryan's fiancée detonated him across social media. A carousel of screenshots, texts drenched in innuendo, hotel receipts, photos that left nothing to the imagination. Her caption cut sharper than any headline, "Engaged but sleeping with another man's wife. Meet your role model." The internet did what it always does. It devoured him. Within hours, brands froze contracts. A sportswear collab paused pending review. A cologne campaign scrubbed his image from their feed. His follower count bled by the minute, once climbing like a stock bubble, now hemorrhaging like a burst vein. Ryan pivoted to rage. His messages to Lena turned jagged, stripped of charm. "If Daddy pulls the chain, I'll leak his tax files. They think they can erase me. I'll burn everything down." He thought he was dangerous. He didn't realize Evan was already 3 steps ahead. Weeks earlier, Evan had taken every shred of Ryan's so-called evidence and placed it directly in Wyatt's hands, auditors, attorneys, and the state dental board. Every discrepancy Ryan thought he could weaponize had already been logged, verified, and cleared. What Ryan didn't know was that his attempt to use it was itself a crime. Extortion. And Evan hadn't stopped there. His quiet sweep into Ryan's past had uncovered a file almost no one knew existed. A sealed arrest from 2 years earlier. Aggravated harassment. Buried under a conditional deal hidden from the public. But the law was clear. Any fresh complaint would drag it back into the light. Ryan wasn't just a disgraced model now. He was a ticking time bomb, one shove away from collapse. That shove came sooner than he expected. At 2:03 a.m., Evan's phone rang. Lena's voice cracked through the receiver, raw with panic. "He's dangerous, Evan. He's leaving voicemails, threatening everything. I don't know what to do. Please, please, I need your help." Evan sat in the dark, the phone cold against his ear. He could hear her sobs, the fear in her breath. Once she had laughed into that same phone while ignoring her children's cries. Now it was her turn to feel the silence on the other end. When he finally spoke, his words were deliberate, scalpel sharp. "Call your lawyer, Lena. This isn't my fire to put out anymore." A pause, then her broken whisper, "You don't care if something happens to me." His voice did not flinch. "I care about Jonah and Miles. I'll always protect them. But boundaries are a form of love, sometimes for your children, sometimes for yourself. You crossed mine a long time ago." He ended the call before she could answer. For the first time in years, he slept without waking to check the other side of the bed. It wasn't empty. It was free. Cornered animals lash hardest before they collapse. Lena's desperation bared its teeth in the form of an anonymous email, clipped sentences dripping with venom. It landed in the inbox of the university provost. "Professor Evan Hale has a history of stalking a vulnerable former student. The name attached, Ryan Cole. Even unproven, the accusation was lethal. A whisper of misconduct could stain a career more deeply than any ink." For a moment, Evan felt the world tilt, the kind of attack designed not to find truth, but to burn reputation where no fire had ever existed. But Evan had prepared for fire. Within 48 hours, the IT division traced the complaint. It hadn't come from an encrypted cafe signal or a burner hotspot. It had come from the Hale residence itself, pinging the same router that streamed Lena's Thursday night dramas. When the ethics officer arrived at Evan's kitchen table, he didn't flinch. He laid everything bare, contemporaneous logs of his lectures, keycard scans that marked his comings and goings, dashcam footage from nights Lena claimed he was stalking. And finally, the archive, his meticulously dated binder of betrayals, each page stamped with evidence. The officer's pen didn't stop moving. She cross-checked, verified, nodded slowly. Then came the turn. She paused at Ryan's name, her brow tightening. She excused herself, stepped onto the porch, and made a quiet call. When she returned, her voice carried a new weight. "Ryan Cole already has a history with us. Not just as your former advisee. He was tangential to another harassment case. You don't need the details, Professor Hale, but what you've provided intersects with an active file." By the week's end, the anonymous complaint hadn't just dissolved, it had backfired. The university forwarded their findings to the district attorney. Lena's IP trace, her forged narrative, Ryan's entanglement. Evan's personnel file, once spotless, now carried a new line at the bottom: extraordinary cooperation during internal review. Not only was suspicion erased, his credibility had been burnished. Lena had tried to weaponize his career. Instead, she had carved her initials into the record of fraud and malice. From a distance, Evan watched her panic mount. For the first time, she was learning what it felt like to swing at someone who had already stripped the ground out from under her. The courtroom smelled faintly of polish and paper, a neutral air designed to disguise the fact that lives were being dissected inside. Lena arrived in a slate gray suit, hair pulled too tight, exhaustion etched beneath her eyes. Her lawyer spoke first, painting her as a dedicated mother under extraordinary marital stress, asking for shared custody, and even split, with assurances that both parents are essential anchors for the children's well-being. Evan sat motionless, his own counsel rising with a calm voice sharpened by truth. "We are not asking to sever maternal ties. We are asking for safety, structure, and stability. Primary custody with Mr. Hale with supervised exchanges and strict communication boundaries. Exhibits A through G demonstrate why." The judge flipped through the binder, her frown deepening page by page. Hotel logs, forged signatures, the falsified line of credit, the smear attempt at the university. Each piece landed like a hammer. When the forged loans surfaced, Evan's name scribbled in Lena's hand. The judge tapped her pen on the page. "This alone could justify fraud charges, and yet we are here discussing custody." Lena whispered frantically to her attorney, but her words carried no further than their table. The gavel of truth was already descending. By mid-afternoon, the ruling came down. Primary custody to Mr. Hale, The mother shall have alternate weekends, contingent upon compliance with counseling and parenting workshops. Phone access restricted to scheduled calls. Any violation will trigger review. Jonah and Miles would live with their father, their rhythm, their stability preserved, but the consequences stretched far beyond family court. The inheritance clause in Wyatt Hale's trust executed itself the moment adultery and fraud were proven. Lena's stake in the flagship clinic dissolved back into the trust, her name crossed out from documents she once flaunted. The dental board followed suit. With discrepancies tied to the forged credit line, Lena's license fell under review, her reputation bleeding faster than Ryan's Instagram followers had. Patients were reassigned, whispers grew louder than filings, and the storybook mother, respected dentist, was now a woman with asterisks after her name. And Ryan, his spiral hit the last rung. Faced with extortion charges, he pled out. Attempted extortion, admitted in a thin voice, his swagger gone. The plea violated the conditions of his sealed harassment case. The judge ordered him held overnight, shackled in the same building where Lena once boasted he made her feel alive. Now he sat behind glass, reduced to a cautionary tale. Evan walked out of court not with triumph, but with the clean, sharp relief of air after a storm. He hadn't won everything, but he had secured what mattered most: his children, his integrity, and a future untethered from lies. Behind him, Lena lingered at the defense table, shoulders bowed, lips trembling over words no one leaned close enough to hear. The empire she betrayed her family for had dissolved in public view. All that remained was a visitation schedule and the echo of doors closing behind her. The move wasn't dramatic. No trucks lined the street, no public announcement, no whispered scandal in the neighborhood. Just a smaller house with wide windows that welcomed the morning light. Evan chose it because it felt honest. There were no echoes of lies in its walls. The boys adapted faster than he expected. Jonah claimed the corner bedroom, stacking Lego castles into fortresses. Miles drew sons on the fridge calendar, insisting every Saturday meant pancakes and every Sunday meant a library trip. Their rhythm wasn't loud, but it was steady. Lena tried once more. She pulled into the driveway one evening, blouse carefully chosen, voice soft, apology folded into neat origami shapes. She said forgive but not sorry, said stress but not choice. Evan listened without interruption. When she stepped closer, he placed a hand on the car door, keeping her outside the threshold. His voice was calm, stripped of theater. I wish you healing, Lena, but I don't need your performance. Our boys will know you as their mother. Beyond that, there's nothing left to negotiate. She blinked hard, mascara trembling at the edges, but he had already stepped back. For the first time, she seemed to realize he wasn't withholding forgiveness. He had already moved past it. In the garage sat a fireproof box. Inside was the final copy of the binder, the archive of betrayal, thick enough to sink a marriage, a career, even a legacy. He had kept it sealed until the decree arrived, ink dry, names severed in legal print. On the night the final papers came, he carried the binder into the yard. The boys stood nearby as he lit the grill. Page by page, he fed the record to the flame. Photos curled, signatures blackened, timestamps disintegrated. He didn't burn them out of anger. He burned them because they no longer had power. Jonah asked if this meant it was really over. Evan ruffled his hair. It means we don't need it anymore. Miles clapped when the last ash drifted skyward, cheering as if a monster had finally vanished. Revenge had already happened before two families in the courtroom in the collapse of Lena and Ryan's ambitions. But the real victory wasn't measured in humiliation or legal wins. It was here, pancakes on Saturdays, library trips on Sundays, boys laughing in a home that no longer had shadows hiding in its corners. Evan hadn't rebuilt the marriage. He had rebuilt himself, and the quiet that followed wasn't emptiness. It was peace, and that's how the story of she cheated with her ex, I exposed her before both families and took everything back, comes to a close. In the end, betrayal doesn't just break marriages, it destroys trust, family bonds, and reputations. But sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't anger, It's walking away stronger with peace and dignity. What would you have done if you were in Evan's place? Would you have exposed her or chosen silence? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next drama we share here on Cheating Stories 7. Until next time, thank you for watching. And remember, betrayal always carries a price.